Well, Ukraine and the war is not the only issue. NATO's plan for Asia is also causing divisions. The alliance sees China as a rising threat, so it's being drawn into the Indo-Pacific. Just look at the guest list. There are 4 special guests. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, New Zealand's Prime Minister Chris Hipkins, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol. These 4 leaders are attending the NATO summit tomorrow. And what do they have in common? 2 things. 1, they're not NATO members. And 2, they're leaders from the Indo-Pacific. So what are they doing in Vilnius? Making friends with NATO. This is the second time they've been invited. The first time was last year, the 2022 summit. They attended that too. And why are they being invited year after year? Because the NATO wants to take on China. And this is a big shift. For the longest time, China was not on NATO's radar. That changed in 2019. That's when NATO called out China for the first time. In December 2019, the alliance issued a statement. This is what it said. We recognize that China's growing influence in international policies present both opportunities and challenges that we need to address together as an alliance. This is from an official communique. And what is NATO so worried about? Well, earlier this year, the NATO Secretary General was in Tokyo. This is how he spelled out his concerns.
If President Putin wins in Ukraine, this would send a message that authoritarian regimes can achieve their goals through brute force. This is dangerous. Beijing is watching closely and learning lessons that may influence its future decisions.
Beijing is watching closely. He's talking about Taiwan and how China might invade it. Stoltenberg had an unambiguous message. If Putin is allowed to win in Ukraine, Xi Jinping will be emboldened and he'll push to retake Taiwan by force. So NATO wants to be ready in case they get pulled into a conflict with China. Stoltenberg has other concerns too.
China is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, bullying its neighbors and threatening Taiwan, trying to control critical infrastructure and spreading disinformation about NATO and the war in Ukraine.
So how does NATO plan to deal with the China challenge? The first step is to formalize these partnerships. Foundational agreements are being discussed. Talks with 2 countries have been concluded. These 2 countries are Japan and Australia. They have a pact. It's called Individually Tailored Partnership Program, or ITPP. Not very imaginative, but this is what they have. It spells out the key areas of cooperation like maritime security, cyber security, climate change, outer space, emerging technologies like AI, and all sorts of things. Now, these agreements could be signed very soon. And they're working on similar deals with 2 other countries, New Zealand and South Korea. So the collaboration is set to deepen. This is a clear declaration of intent. But it's not clear how far NATO is willing to go. Will NATO extend the alliance beyond Europe? Will it send troops to Asia? Will NATO join the war if China indeed attacks Taiwan? There is no answer yet because the alliance itself is divided on these questions. Recently, a proposal was made, a proposal that also made news. NATO wanted an office in Japan. We told you about it. But the idea was shot down by France. So NATO has had to defer its plans for Japan. And this is not just Macron who's opposing such moves. Leaders in the Indo-Pacific also opposed NATO's expansion, like Paul Keating, the former Prime Minister of Australia. Recently, he called the NATO chief a quote-unquote supreme fool, his words, supreme fool. He was talking about NATO's plan for the Indo-Pacific, and he said it's a bad idea. Now, Keating agrees with Macron's line of thinking. So there are divisions. But NATO works on the principles of consensus. For any move to be made, all members must be on board. And as of today, they're not on board vis-a-vis Asia. So they may reach out to regional allies, but the pivot to Asia is still work in progress.